Well, if
Yeah.
you do a performance or show, maybe you can skate to Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
Maybe, yeah. I gotta lose about 20 pounds first, though.
Hi guys, we are back and we are with our three lovely guests. Unfortunately, our fourth guest, Mirai, is not here. She has some engagements and she's extremely busy, but she wishes us all the best with our recording. We have Chen here, Patrick Chan, and Michelle Hong. Yay! Thank you guys so much for coming back.
So we are continuing our conversation about being Asian in figure skating. And of course, right now we have not every Asian person represented. So we're talking more about East Asian skaters. So we're continuing our conversation with the Asian body competing and the Olympics. So Keisha, you take it away.
Okay, you're about to steal my job
I was. This is what the prompt is for. Go ahead.
So you often hear about, East Asian skaters in skating as being meek, quiet, unable to express themselves and their emotions. And you often hear them from commentators on the TV. Is that something that you guys have heard, and how has that affected you as a figure skater, performer, and even as a coach? Let's take it away with you, Michelle.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for bringing up this conversation. It's kind of interesting. I think that sometimes we often think that it's just outsiders who perpetuate these type of stereotypes, but it's also very internal. And so for someone with a personality like mine, who is the complete opposite of these descriptions that you share, it's actually quite alarming and surprising for someone like me to exist or be so expressive in a way. I mean, it shocks a lot of people, including my own family. And so that's kind of where I talk about this internal type of stereotyping, or this internal type of mindset to be a specific way. We in our own communities have expectations as well. And so even in my own household, I was taught to be quiet, disciplined, polite, respect your elders, don't share when you're not supposed to share, kind of keep your head down and keep going. And I think that contributes to how we move through the world, because if you're taught that way, then you're most likely going to abide that way to kind of follow the guidelines of what your family wants of you. But since I think because my personality is just so out there and outspoken, the way that my mom has shared, they couldn't really control that. I just was me. And I was very thankful that my family embraced that, as they saw that it wasn't going to be easy for them to kind of keep me inside this box. And so skating was actually an outlet for me. It allowed me to express myself. And that's, interestingly enough, where my parents really highlighted that. They were like, yes, perform out there, use your expression and move your body, and let's pick music that will shape how people are able to, hear a story from your heart. And so it was very interesting. I think that comes from my Cambodian American roots as well, where we have Apsara dancers, and they're actually able to utilize their hand motions and their cultural attire to tell a story, to share expression to the royalty in Cambodia. And so I think that there's a lot of deep cultural creativity in every single different Asian heritage. And I think it is really beautiful to see someone like Chen bring her culture and tie it into A Stars on Ice, where she used those beautiful fan-like kind of arm costumes. And she's able to use fans when she was younger too. And she ties in her cultural experiences through that, and is able to speak through actions and motions and her expression. And so, yes, even though I have heard that, especially amongst coaches to students, I feel like it's awesome to kind of have this level of representation in other ways, where you kind of see Michelle Kwan be very vocal and very strong about her opinions. And so I think that it really takes role models to be able to push past those stereotypes, and also takes a little bit of generational change as well. So I think that's why I wanted to bring that up, in terms of it's not just outsiders who are sharing these type of kind of box mentality, it's also internal.
I mean, Patrick, you're probably one of the most expressive skaters to me, and the way you skate is so beautiful. Have you heard anything like that before?
I don't think I've ever heard words directly spoken to me and giving off that impression that I can't be an artistic skater or an expressive skater. I think it's just looking at the history of Asian skaters in figure skating, and some of the skaters I looked up to, they were always, especially in the male category, they were always more focused on, they were really great technical skaters, great jumpers. Chen Li was one of the first to do quad toe in competition, where I would say my strengths, like you mentioned, was the artistry and not actually the jumps. I didn't like the jumps. I really enjoyed doing complex choreography and really hard step sequences. And I think my coach, thankfully, my coach, Mr. Colson, one of my first coaches, just really believed that he could change that narrative and turn me not in change my personality in a very meek or very, rule following and not making lots of noise, to very much making lots of noise on the ice, where I have all the power and I'm the one on stage. So I've always really enjoyed and embraced the artistry of skating and the freedom to skate the way I want. And it's taken me to Olympic level and Olympic medals. And I think everybody has a little bit of creativity. They just need to tap into it and believe in it.
I agree. The fact that you're saying that, you didn't like jumping, though, you're an amazing jumper as well, on top of the artistry. So, and also,
I winged it.
Yeah, and and we loved Mr. Colson as well. Like, seeing him at the competition, what an amazing man he was.
And a character,
Yeah.
a very quirky character.
Always wearing his hat. I loved
Looking
it.
exquisite. Yeah.
Tina, how about yourself? Have you?
Well, it's really interesting. And I feel like it's so long since, I was actively skating, and kind of thinking back there, I feel like it's a completely different moment than what we think of skating now. But, even when I started coaching, the kinds of ways that people tried to monitor, think what you were doing. And I always think back to a moment where, I was a really young coach in like my 20s, and I had a male Asian skater, and, people would say, are you sure you want to pick that music for him? Are you sure you want to encourage that kind of movement? Are you sure you want to do this? And, and that it was, it became clear to me very early on that people were projecting their own anxieties about what was appropriate, and sort of where people were supposed to fit in onto me and this other skater, right? And they'd say, are you sure, maybe the two of you shouldn't really, like, maybe, and I was kind of like, I was like, why, what's the problem with some of these music? Or they'd say to me, you always pick really interesting music. And I was like, and I never really understood what that meant. And then I was like, oh, like, this is a moment where they also look at me and go, oh, you have a kind of engagement with world music or with different musical forms, and you're looking and listening differently. And, but I was like, oh, you're reading me as racialized. So you're reading me in a way that I'm different than. And so people, I think, thought they were well-meaning, kind of saying, are you sure you want to do that? You want to stand out in this group? You want to pick different things? And I'm talking about low-level skaters. I'm talking about, pre-juvenile skaters that, it's not going to make a record. They like the music. I like the music. We're good to go, right? But this idea that, that there was something that you needed to kind of fit yourself in. And I think, those are concerns. And I'm like so happy to be in this conversation with Patrick, because, my feeling and my sort of memories of listening to and reading media, right, was that as skaters, from Japan, from Korea, from China started to rise globally, that you heard all the time commentators saying things like, well, and they'd ask the question as if this is a problem. Why are Asian skaters so good? Like, instead of celebrating it, they'd ask this question like, this is maybe, and I think this is where you hear things like the danger of a yellow peril and this way of this coded, they go, how did they get so good? And then they'd have this language of, they're really disciplined. the same language that people use to explain the rise of the Japanese economy, the same language, like this way of like, oh, they're really disciplined and they'll just do what they're told. And I always remember this because in my memory of the media, Patrick was the exception because he was Asian and Canadian. And so he was the exception who could bring two worlds together. So unlike Patrick saying he didn't love to jump, everyone was like, he's technically exquisite and he's, and his performance is exquisite. So everyone was like, it comes together. And what I always recall is this kind of, oh, because he can blend two worlds. So that's why we see this kind of as an exception to those who are only Asian, right? And this argument that there's a discipline and, I'm sure as coaches, we hear that, there's assumptions that if you teach an Asian child, their parent will be super disciplined and tell them they get to do what they, and that they're going to do what you want and therefore going to be easier to train. And I think these are, they're stereotypes that come forward and they may be true for some Asian children and some Asian families, and they may completely not be true. Sounds like my upbringing was a little bit like Michelle's, I didn't fit in a box. My parents, allowed me to be, whatever, the stubborn, outspoken one, all I wanted. So, but I think I hear it from these different ways. And I think, there are ways that we have to, as Michelle sort of said, think about how we internally project them, but also how just the media also perpetuate certain ideas when they're trying to explain what they see in front of them without always critically thinking about what terms they're using or how they're framing it.
You kind of led me into my next point about, stereotypes and selection of music. Did anyone ever push you to skate to, Asian specific music such as, like Mulan, Miss Saigon, Memoirs of a Geisha, etc., etc.? And how did that make you feel if they did?
I don't think anybody forced me to skate to it. I think I was so happy to skate to it. It was actually when Mulan came out, and that was my very first program at age 7 years old. And I think it was such a special moment for me because that was the first time I saw myself in television. Like, to have Mulan be a Disney princess was amazing. And at the time I was 7, so it wasn't like I had 20 years of not seeing myself, but it was just really cool because even within those 7 years, what I normally saw was Cinderella, was Sleeping Beauty, and was all these other characters that I couldn't really relate to. And so it was just honestly something that I found a lot of pride in. And I helped choose my program competition costume. And it was basically like water. It was like a dress that looked like water. It was mixed with blue and white, and that was the reflection song. And so I think it is kind of interesting when somebody else chooses the music for you and pushes this narrative onto you, as opposed to the child choosing that music piece for themselves. And I think that those are two different ways of approaching things, and I can see where it could be problematic when it is forced upon.
Yeah, exactly. I love that you wanted to skate to Mulan, and I love the sounding of that dress. It sounds beautiful. How about you, Patrick?
Yeah, unfortunately, I never really picked a lot of my music in my career, and I think it comes back to the genesis of it is my mom. Just, I remember clearly at age 7 or 8, very early on, my mom choosing for me not to skate to Asian music or Oriental music. She always tried to shy me away from it, and never explained why. And I don't know what motivated her to make that really bold decision. And I think partly now I realize maybe it was a bit of, she felt embarrassed, which is so sad to say, and almost wanted me to whitewash myself in the sport of figure skating and to fit in faster, or skating to Rachmaninoff might have been more advantageous than skating to Hidden Dragon, Crouching Tigers and Hidden Dragon. Beautiful music, and Asia has some of the most beautiful pieces of music and beautiful instruments. And I never had the chance to skate to it or even had the choice. And I think that just tells you a little bit of the stigma or just the fear that my own parents felt, and just completely shied me away from skating to those types of music.
You know, it's very interesting that you say that, because during like the original dance years or short dance years where there was like a cultural piece for a dance, so you had to do like a folk dance. The first year being Carrisford Junior, we skated to Umoja, which is a South African musical that my dad actually helped bring to Canada. It was actually amazing, and we loved it. We seen it multiple times. But Carol came and was like, "You should do this," and I was so apprehensive about it and like scared. And I could tell, at the time I couldn't put my finger on it, but it was like the feeling of like, I don't want to be like further othered. I'm like already Black in the sport, as well as like, here's me now skating to African music, and yes, I can move well to it, and I love the music, and it makes me dance when I'm off the ice. But when I put it on the ice, it felt like something that would further constrain me into a box. Now, obviously, I don't feel that way, but back then, when it was first suggested, I was very much like, let's do a Ukrainian dance. I don't know. Like immediately going to like the whitest thing ever. That's like, so I definitely kind of feel where you're coming from, and kind of what that anxiety that your mother must have felt in that kind of situation of, let's not further other my son and let's keep him. It sucks, absolutely, but yeah, that's
yeah.
sure.
I skated to like Tarzan, and my coach wanted me to be in like leopard costume, and I like look back at them like, like I don't know if I should have done that, but it was, for me as a kid, I'm just like, I love Tarzan, I love that movie, and I thought of myself as this woman Tarzan. So it's just it's very interesting, like when you think back now about your programs. And I remember,
but you chose, right? You chose that. You wanted it. So where I felt I didn't even have the interest or the courage to pick it, because right off the bat I was already discouraged. So but that's life, right? And I think now it's different. Things have changed, thankfully.
Well, if you do a performance or show, maybe you can skate to Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
Maybe, yeah. I gotta lose about 20 pounds first, though.
Same, girl.
Yeah.
Well, it's so interesting talking and thinking about this, because I think, as Michelle sort of brought up, and Patrick, when I think about the way the music gets chosen, I think so much of it really is about who's doing the picking and then who's doing the choreography, right? And so like when I hear and I see things, and I have to say, I'm one of those coaches who cringes. And when someone comes to me and they say, I want to skate to Memoirs of a Geisha, and I go, my head usually goes, do you know the story?
Yeah.
And when they go, yeah, I've seen the movie, and I'm like, have you really seen the movie? Like, have you thought about what this means? And I also think it changes over time, right? Like, these are classic pieces. So, Miss Saigon, Memoirs of Geisha, they're all the same story. They're, Asian woman can't find herself till she falls in love with white man. White man, uses her for his own sexual gratification and his white masculinity. She eventually dies and kills herself to fulfill who he is, right? Like, it's a story. It's Orientalist, it's a trope. And I think at times we always took the music out of that context. But, for me, more and more, you can't take it out of there. So when I say to, like, when kids come to me and, depending on how old they are, I say, you should step back, you should think about the story. You should think about, is this what you want to be portraying? And I'm usually like, and discuss it with your parents. And I was like, and think about it. And then are you prepared to do the work to do a respectful representation and interpretation of this piece of music? So, I'm not going to make you do this 80,000 times in your program, because that's really not appropriate. Or whatever other move I think, symbolizes an entire culture, entire movement. And I think that's the difficulty now, is that there's, kind of an exposure. And as we go through and as we get more sophisticated, right? And people are just more sophisticated now. So are kids, right? So we can all talk about appropriation. We can, sort of, the Mulan Kwan story has been remade so many times. And, I think with Michelle, it was really exciting when it was first made to go, oh, let's look at a broadening. But the more we look at it and go, it's also a movie with a whole musical score and representations that have been produced by Asians with Asians starring for like the entire 20th century. So it's not like we needed Disney to save it for us, right? Like we didn't need them to bring it to us. And we didn't need them to show us what Asians can do. We could actually go to other places for these. And I think these are some of the questions that I think as we begin to think music, like what are our responsibilities as we really look, and where do we ask people to find their culture? So we're like, and kids, and I think young kids, they're going to come to us and they're going, this is what I hear. And I saw this movie and I love it. And you're like, that's great. And as you get older, you should be thinking more, and choreographers should be thinking more, and right, because it's a much more complicated picture than just the piece that what the 7-year-old likes, right, and why they, and the goal is for them to love what they're skating to, right. But as we get older, we have to engage with these questions, and that's where I'm always kind of like, which music do we pick, and also just asking people to listen broadly, like listen to a lot more types of music. Think about what you might skate to, and then sometimes it takes us back to Rachmaninoff because it's fantastic music, right? Like sometimes you end right back where you started because you're like, this is the piece. It is really, really good, right? So
I say let those dead composers rest for a little bit, but but I kind of want to move on just because we're a little strapped for time as well. Let's go to the Asian body. Especially in figure skating, with the Asian skaters being at the pinnacle right now, Asian body has been fetishized. Frank Carroll, former coach of Michelle Kwan and Mirai once said, they have bodies that are quick and little. They're able to do things very fast. It's like the Chinese divers. If you look at those bodies, there's nothing there. They just look like little nymphs. The Asian body is supposed to be perfect, completely streamlined, great access for rotation. You're not supposed to have any wide hips or any kind of chest or legs. You're just supposed to be a stick that rotates. How has the pressure of fitting into this mold affected you or your skaters? And then Tina, as well as the end, if you could speak on how this perpetuates racist ideals and devalues the athleticism of Asian figure skaters and athletes.
So for myself, it was very interesting as when I was growing up and I was inspired by my sister Melissa to figure skate, I didn't feel any pressure in terms of my body because I was quote unquote the perfect age and also the perfect body type to be on this competitive track. And I was exactly what you described, very, very thin, muscular, and lean. And I had a fast metabolism. It really didn't matter what I ate, but I was able to maintain this body type up until I was 16, 17. And that's where things started to shift in terms of puberty. But I noticed that my sister Melissa struggled with this stereotype and this ideal body at home, at the ice rink, and at school. And she went through puberty earlier on, and she had the wide hips, she had the muscular legs, and she was just more full figure. And there was nothing but beauty that we all see, especially now. But during those times, and especially in the Asian community, that's not what is deemed perfect. That is not what is deemed the correct body type to be able to execute these elements and to also just exist in the Asian community. It's crazy because there's beauty standards within our own communities that just add more layers of pressure when you enter the sport. And so when I started to feel that way, I would be like, why are my thighs bigger than the girls, my Asian friends who are next to me? They don't even do sports. Those were the thoughts that I would circulate in my mind. And I was just like, what am I doing wrong? If anything, I'm working out the most. This doesn't make sense to me. And it was just because I was going through puberty, and those things are natural parts of life. But because of this pressure that I had to maintain in both my sport and also comparing myself to the Asian woman in my community, it was very difficult to swallow, and it was very difficult for me to kind of maintain this level of confidence in myself. And so it is quite challenging, and it's also one of the things that I rarely ever talk about. And I honestly thank you both for bringing this up, because it's very beautiful to see that a lot of the Japanese women, they're defying the odds. That's what I would say. And I appreciate that there has been, in my personal opinion, because maybe I'm watching it in international networks, so I might not understand, but I don't think they talk about their body size or body type. I think they just commend them for their artistry and their athleticism. And it just goes to show that much more what the human body can do, regardless of body size or ethnic background.
Yeah, I think, in my opinion, I think we have all types of body types within the Asian population. I think I'm not a very skinny person. I'm not. I probably have I was much more muscular as a skater, and I was probably one of the more muscular skaters in the whole event. And I think it's all relative, and it's all. I think you could look at the white community and see that there's all types of body types as well. There's really skinny people, and there's fairly muscular and curvy people. So I think it's kind of weird to generalize as all Asian people are slender and flat chested, because that's I think very inaccurate.
It's crazy that Frank Carroll would say something like that when one of the amazing athlete, Midori Ito, wasn't this small little thing, and she was beautiful skater, powerhouse, so it's very interesting that he comes to those conclusions. Yes.
Well, I think it's so interesting and important to think about. And I think it's that, as you began and you quoted Frank Carroll for us and talked about fetishization, right? Because as Michelle and Patrick have said, Asians come in all types of body shapes, sizes, looks, just like all other people, right? And so, but it's that kind of, to be honest, the white male gaze of what makes for a good Asian woman, and then projecting it onto those few cases that you can make fit into them. So you pick the bodies that you think most fit, and then and then the personality traits, and you keep perpetuating those and saying, this is what makes them so good. Not, as I would say, people's really hard work, like all athletes, anyone who makes it to the highest level worked really, really hard. They're probably talented, but they mostly worked really, really, really hard, and they got themselves there, right? So no one got there just because they had the perfect body, right? There's a lot of people where you go they should be really good at something, and you're turns out I can't do that sport at all, right? So, and so I think these are the questions of how do we begin to fetishize and project them out onto people. And in some ways, what that's also suggesting is that they have an unfair advantage, right? So it perpetuates this idea that somehow, who we think should be doing well are being disadvantaged because somebody else has an unfair advantage. And I just feel this is the moment we need to talk about this, whether it's, we've all been looking at the Olympics. I'm sure some of you've been, following the language around whether it's transgender athletes or thinking about, testosterone levels, and this idea that there's somehow some people genetically, and they're usually racialized people, have an unfair advantage because of their genetics, or other people, Michael Phelps, giant wind, arm span, well, that was just, genetic good fortune, and then he worked really hard to make it come true, right? That's the language. And so that we have to control others and also make reasons why they might be good, and that somehow those reasons are different. And so I think that's where it begins to perpetuate them. So there's that kind of structural level, the way it becomes, just racist language in my mind. And then at the same time, the danger that it has for individuals. So, within them. So whether it's saying to everybody, this is the ideal body type, and we're going to pick, the 1 or 2 people who fit it, and whether you're Asian or not Asian, this is what we expect you to look like to be a good skater, it's just dangerous. We know this sport is rife with, body image issues, with eating disorders. These things, they're perpetuated by all skaters, all genders in skating. It's just it's the way the sport is, and something that we need to really be aware of as we talk about them, and sort of, accept that all bodies can be strong, powerful, and can get things done. And there isn't just one that can do it, right? And so I think, as we look at them, and I'm really mindful as well, it's, fascinating for me, some of the more, what I think, politicized Asian American and Asian Canadian groups, community organizations, largely younger groups, they're constantly circulating. How do you respond to fat shaming in an Asian family? And the kind of prevalence also, as Michelle said, of this idea that there is also that your idea of having made good, of being disciplined enough, can often be projected through the body. And, these have, they come from different places within it, but it's so, and like my friends were just like, it's surprising when you just think about how much has to be done to provide people with the language to respond to family questions of, oh, you look like you've gained weight. Are you sure you want to eat that? Are you sure, are you being a good Asian? Because, we think you're chubbier than you should be. You're not as tall as you should be. You're not as thin as you should be. You might not get a job. And, all of these things, kind of come together at different places into our world of sport. And I think that's where we have to be even more mindful, that says, actually, all bodies are welcome in sport. Enjoy the sport, enjoy movement, right? Enjoy your own body, and it's going to change, and your body will keep changing, and you should be able to embrace what that changing body can do in different ways. Because otherwise, sexism, racism, it all gets folded into there, unfortunately.
Hey, Tina.
Wow. Oh my goodness, Tina, I honestly really appreciate the way that you were able to tie that all together, because I don't necessarily ever have the courage to describe my experiences, because they're so personal. And in a way, you feel, or for myself, I feel very ashamed of having had those experiences. I never want to talk badly about my family or anything of that sort, but it is a shared experience that once you start opening up about it, many other Asian families and many other Asian stories are very similar, where communicating about one's body, what they're eating, how much they've gained, how much they've lost, that is a natural conversation. It happens at the dinner table, it happens at the breakfast table, it happens when you're just meeting. And it's this immense amount of pressure that a lot of people don't really recognize. And so it's kind of interesting to say that we have this advantage, this genetic advantage, when, if anything, we have this huge mental hurdle and this disadvantage to even pull yourself up to believe in what you have as your own self being good enough. And so I think those are the things that we deal with silently. I've dealt with silently, but I feel very appreciative of the way that you were able to convey that message in such a way that is very powerful. And it brought me the courage to share a little bit more about my experience. So thank you.
That's why you're the professor, Tina.
I just want to say thank you, Michelle, for sharing it. I just, in kind of a moment of reciprocity, I would say, I'm mixed race, and there was many times when I was skating, though, and the way that, and I'm not a thin, tiny, petite frame. And so, and I used to, like, I know in my mind, I used to think like, why don't I have that Asian body? Like, and I would probably do better. And I don't think I thought I'd be a better skater, but that people would see me differently, right? They would see that you have that moment where you think, well, if I was doing the same thing, but with a different body, would I score better? Would they like it better? And as, I don't have to tell people like Acacia, as you move into the world of ice dance, that's all you think about. Would the same movement look better if I had X, Y, Z, if my shoulders weren't as wide, if I, my legs were an inch longer? And, these are really counterproductive. Luckily, I think I just realized at some point, I'm probably not actually going to be on a national team. I should probably just, continue and love skating the way I love skating and do my thing. And and was able to move out from that. But I think that kind of that internalization of how it moves and, and then when I started doing research and going to China, I was not at all prepared for every person I met who would comment on whether they thought I was fatter or skinnier. I think my internet just went unstable. But if you're always worried about how people perceive you, then when people meet you with, you gained weight, you lost weight, it's incredibly uncomfortable. And then you realize that, as I used to speak with people, oh, that's just the way, that's how it works. And then they kept saying to me, you weren't really raised Asian, were you, if you don't know this? And I said, I guess not fully. So I feel like I, wasn't always in that world, but you internalize other parts of it because you know that others expect you to be seen other ways, certain ways.
So I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please tune in next week for part 4.
FSDIA's Conversations in Color is recorded and edited in Toronto and Pickering, Ontario, Canada, on the traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee, Mississauga of Scugog, Wendat, Huron-Wendat, and the Mississauga of the Credit.
Thank you so much for tuning into FSDIA's Conversations in Color. Please subscribe to our channel. Find us on the gram at Figure Skating DIA, on Facebook at the Figure Skating Diversity and Inclusion Alliance, and our website at fsdia.org. And remember to color your ice.